we're going to know what that is. A lot of Parkinson's patients have heard about this now as a therapy which is pretty established for the treatment of Parkinson's symptoms. I'm going to avoid doing most of the basics on this. I want to talk about a couple things that have happened over the last couple of years, which have dramatically increased the efficacy of deep brain stimulation or are about to kind of really have a big impact on it. So just briefly about myself, I'm not from Connecticut at all. I'm actually from Montana, and you might wonder how the hell you go from Montana to Connecticut. I ask myself that all the time. I went from Montana to Rice University, which is in Houston, Texas. That's where I went to undergraduate. I hated Houston so much that I stayed there for my MD PhD, which took 7 years, and then I stayed there for residency, which took 7 years. So I lived in Houston for about 18 years total. If you've lived south of the Mason-Dixon line in a swamp for that long, it becomes really important to get out. I went to the University of Toronto for 1 year for a fellowship, the primary goal of which was to learn more about deep brain stimulation. So I did a whole other year doing functional neurosurgery. That's right for my fellowship. And then finally ended up at UConn Health, where I've been now for the last year and a half. So I know I said I wasn't going to go over too many of the basics of DBS, because again, a lot of people have heard about it. But DBS, and I'll say that a lot, I can't help myself, is deep brain stimulation. This involves basically putting in what you would consider to be a cardiac pacemaker, except instead of into the heart, we put the pacemaker into the brain. All right. It's called deep because we're inserting the wires about 6 centimeters into the brain, and we don't actually see where they end up at physically. You just see the surface of the brain and the wire goes into it. And so stimulation, because we're going to run electrical current into it. Something that I try and tell my patients when we're talking about deep brain stimulation is that electricity is like a drug. Okay. There's going to be good things and bad things about it. There's going to be lots of side effects. And the things I'm going to talk about today are ways to control the dosing of the electricity, the amount you're getting, and also to kind of change up and improve side effects. So this is a nice little cartoon from a paper from about a decade and a half ago, picturing where the wires are going in. They end up going in kind of in the front of the head. And then we target many different areas of the brain with deep brain stimulation, but for Parkinson's, we primarily target what's called the globus pallidus or the subthalamic nucleus. And so you'll hear that a lot if you're ever talking to a surgeon or your movement disorder neurologist about where the hell do we put these things at. And there's a lot of reasons we might pick one target over the other for Parkinson's, but every disease has its own set of targets. So I've treated addiction, depression, pain. We've also targeted things for epilepsy. Last month, about 6 weeks ago, we did the first 2 pediatric DBS cases in the history of Connecticut. We did 2 cases for that. They were both epilepsy. We're waiting to kind of tell the world about it because you want to make sure you had a really good result before you tell everyone. So the initial results look good, but hopefully we'll be kind of releasing that out to let everyone know sometime in the next 2 to 3 months. But those targets are completely different. So the part of the brain you're stimulating or trying to defibrillate is different depending on what disease you have. Now I'm going to talk about some recent advances in the hardware and recent advances in what the hardware can do. So I'm just going to let you know that anytime you're talking about deep brain stimulation, there are 3 companies that make it. There's a company called Abbott, Boston Scientific, and Medtronic. We definitely have reps from Abbott here today and from Medtronic. When I talk to my patients about this, I tell them, it's like thinking about I'm going to get an iPhone versus I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get an Android. They're all both going to make phone calls. They're going to send texts. You're going to get on the internet. You're going to have apps. But there's going to be like some subtle differences between them, right? So you really like sending texts with a blue background. That might mean that you like Medtronic more. If you like actually, having a device which is free from Apple's surveillance of you, you might like Boston, okay? But they will both do everything equally well to a certain extent. The companies won't tell you that, but they're all effective and good devices. And the reason your surgeon might pick one over the other, if you're ever talking about DBS, they do have a couple slight differences. And that's actually what we're going to mostly talk about today, because this is where a lot of the real new advances have come from. I have no disclosures. I don't get money from any of the companies. Hopefully one day that'll change because I'm a state employee, but we'll see. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a piece of technology which all the companies have. it is called directional leads. All right. And so you can't even get non-directional leads anymore. So what the hell do I mean about that? Thinking about DBS, one of my favorite analogies for it is a game of battleship. I'm targeting an area of your brain to stimulate, okay? And we even have coordinates that we're using to get the wire into the right spot. But we're putting wires into your brainstem, which is a part of your brain which has been conserved and has been around for quite literally millions of years. Like your brainstem looks pretty similar to an iguana's, all right? And so these areas are very conserved and it's really high priced real estate. There's a lot of information going in and out of it. There's a lot of really important things that are happening. And so being super precise with where we put the wire at is the difference between success and failure. Because when we stimulate, okay, you're going to stimulate the target you want to, but if you're not perfectly on target, you're going to stimulate things you don't want to. This is where electricity is like a drug. When you stimulate something you don't want to actually stimulate, you're going to get a side effect. And a side effect in the brainstem means not fun things. Double vision, weird sensations in your arms and legs, pulling of your muscles, slurring of your speech, really weird sensations in your gut. So being super accurate is important, okay? So unlike Battleship, we don't just get to keep trying at it. We put it in and then we hope for the best. But as you increase the amount of electricity, i.e. you increase the dosage, you're going to get more and more of the brainstem is going to get stimulated. It's just like when you go up on your Cinemet. The more you go up on the Cinemet, the more like dyskinesias you get, right? Because you're tipping over and getting more and more dopamine in the system. When you go up in the electricity in your DBS system, you stimulate more and more of the brainstem. You get a higher and bigger volume of it. So you're going to start stimulating more things. So if we wanted to hit that ship on the right, we were close, but with a really low level of stimulation, a really small circle around the X, you don't get it. So you have to maybe increase it a little bit. And now you're actually going to start to hit that ship, right? But you can notice that there are other ships here that maybe I want to avoid. So if we have to increase it even more, now we're starting to actually hit these other ships. So we're starting to get side effects and effects that we don't want. So the reason for that is that at the end of this lead, at the end of the little plastic wire we put in, the contacts are just a full circle. So then they decided, okay, well, we're going to make this a little bit smarter. We're going to make it so that the circle's broken up into pie wedges. So you can just say, I'm going to aim the current in one direction. What would that look like? Instead of having a big circle around the X, and if that's where my wire's at, that's where we're stimulating, now you can stimulate in one direction. So you can go up in intensity without hitting the other ships. This is what a directional lead does. Now, again, all the companies have some kind of version of this now, this directional leading. The real difference at this point is the software that's used for programming, and that's better or worse at some of the companies. I'll let them talk to the movement disorder neurologists. I don't really, it's not my end of the stick. But this is what it kind of looks like when people present this on papers. And these are what the leads look like. You can see that they've taken this, and instead of like a full circle, they've chopped it up. Okay. And so what they're arguing here is if there's a green area you want to stimulate and this red area you don't want to stimulate, a sweet spot and a sour spot, you can actually aim this with the lead. So you're only stimulating the part of the brainstem you want to stimulate. And here's a little, people do all kinds of computational analysis on this. People publish tons and tons of papers with it. It's still an area that people are getting used to and that the neurologists are getting better at programming, okay? But it's definitely something that's very exciting to me because if you have a patient who has, over time, Parkinson's is a progressive disease, your Cinemet's going to go up. Guess what? The amount of electricity you need from the deep brain stimulation is also going to go up. So with the new leads, your amount of electricity can go up, but you can aim it such that you don't get those side effects. We call that like the therapeutic window. You know, it's just like a medication. You need enough medication to get good effect, but too much medication, you get bad effects. It's the same thing with the electricity. The directional leads make that window wider.
Before I forget my question, what if you need it in two parts of your brain?
Okay, so
or two parts of the affected area.
Okay, that's an interesting question. There are some people who need DBS for more than one reason. More likely what happens is that people get DBS in one part of their brain, and then I have to go back and revise it. I've never had to revise one of my own cases. My leads have ended up where I want them at, but sometimes someone will come in with failed DBS. The success rate for DBS should be over 80, 90%, okay? And so some people, we have to come back and we put more leads into their brain. You can do that. You can put 2 leads through one burr hole. I don't know, theoretically, you can put 3 leads through a borehole. That does not sound like a fun day for me personally, but you can. So let's say you have Parkinson's and someone implants you in the subthalamic nucleus and it doesn't work. You come in and see me. We say, okay, you got failed DBS. I can put in leads through that same borehole into the globus pallidus. That is possible. I have had to do that once.
Okay,
We call that rescue DBS.
so you don't really have to make a literally physically quite as wide a new hole.
The hole, okay, so when we actually do the surgery, the hole ends up being 11 millimeters, and that's the standard size of the drill bit that we use. It's 11 millimeters. And there's a piece of plastic that sits in it. This is one of the things that is very different between the companies. It's called a lock or a stem lock that holds the wire in place so the wire doesn't move around. You take that out, and then the wire is like 1.4 solids, 1.4 millimeters diameter.
The diameter, yeah.
Diameter lead. So the lead's only about 1.4 millimeters in diameter. You got a ton of like real estate in there to do all kinds of stuff. So you can throw another lead in.
Okay,
Yeah, totally possible.
How do you know that you're in the right place? Is it something you know immediately?
Okay, that's a good question. So you would think that after this has been FDA approved for Parkinson's for 23 years now. Approved in 2000. You'd think that all the surgeons would have the same way that we do things, but we can't possibly have that because I'm the smartest neurosurgeon, but my way is the best and your way is wrong, and we have to go to conferences and argue about this. But all surgeons do it slightly differently, okay? And what they might do in the operating room might be wildly different. I do my surgeries with people very sleepy but still awake and responsive. So I can do brain recordings and we can do brain testing. There are places where they do it completely asleep. And this gets into like some of actually how you do it. In the operating room, we are going to know what the side effect profile is going to be because we're going to ratchet up the current quite a bit beyond what you should ever need. And I'm going to know what your side effects are. This is one of the reasons I love DBS because when you do this and someone gets a side effect, it tells you which structure you're close to. I know how I've misaimed based on the side effect you have. You have muscle pulling or slurring your speech. I'm either too anterior or too lateral. You're throwing a bit more medial or posterior. If you're getting weird sensations in your arms and legs, I'm too posterior. I got it. That's how it becomes like battleship. And it's an applied exercise of anatomy. And they love it on exams because you can have a written exam where for like neurosurgery boards, you can pose these questions and it's like so that's how I know, and we will see effect in the operating room.
And is it something you can tweak based on symptoms after the surgery?
You can tweak it a little bit, and there's a lot that programming can do, especially with directional leads. In the operating room, I want to get the lead into the sweet spot to minimize how much electricity you need, because this is an implant. Your DBS is something that you might have for like decades. The closer I am to the perfect spot, the less electricity you need, so that over time we can ratchet up a lot more so you can get effect 20, 25 years from now. So we will know in the operating room if we're getting good effect or not good effect. In fact, if I get it right in the right spot, the act of putting the wire in will actually make your symptoms get dramatically better. We call that insertional effect. And we see that, and if we get insertional effect, like, I'm very happy. But we also do recordings, and I can hear different parts of the brain. Different areas of the brain sound differently electrically while we're recording them. And so it's really trippy, but the patient gets to hear their brain while we're doing the surgery. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I do. Now, there are other people who will do it completely asleep. And that's because MRIs have gotten so much better. Our understandings of things have gotten so much better. So there are people who do it completely asleep. But that's a difference just in terms of how I do this with how other people do this.
Our neurologist has suggested that if you're a Parkinson's patient, general anesthesia is disrecommended.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
Okay. So this is one of the reasons I also do it this way. General anesthesia does hit us harder and harder as we age. And people have done studies where they've looked at patients after the fact. And it's a shocking number of people will develop some kind of encephalopathy, or their brain won't be working as well 6 to 12 months later. Even though it's like, oh, it's just general anesthesia. It's another reason I do it that way. There is part of the procedure you have to be asleep for, and that's getting the wires from here down to your chest. That procedure takes me about like 30, 45 minutes, so it's much faster. You cannot tolerate it from a pain perspective in order to that's not something I would ever entertain. They did it once at the University of Toronto, and my staff was like, we will never even consider it again. So you do have to be under GA for that. GA is relatively safe. That is something you have to know that you can take a hit from it.
Got it. Thank you.
My wife had DBS 19 years ago. That means she doesn't have directional.
Yeah, so the directional leads came out, I want to say about 5 years ago, was I think the first case I did where I put them in. Now you can only get directional leads. We can't swap them out. Swapping them out would be taking it out and putting a new one in, and that's not something we would do just for directional. Just own, this is the own, their own, that's the only thing that's available at this point for the directional. They all came out with new hardware, starting in like about 3 to 5, within the last 3 to 5 years, the companies have massively updated their hardware that we're implanting. So just what it is. Yeah. Okay.
Does that mean that, until you have a certain, whatever symptom you're gonna treat with it badly enough, you don't recommend getting it because of things, for reasons
Yeah.
like that?
So I think that the wires are going to be as good as the wires are going to be now for the next, for a while. The batteries and the thing we put in the chest, that's actually going to keep updating and getting better. So we just talked about all the advances of the leads. The batteries, usually we do a replacement every 3 to 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer than that. When we do a replacement, the batteries have to be backwards compatible with the old wires. And the companies don't do that out of the goodness of the heart. It's FDA required. Okay. But then you get the new battery with the new technology on it. And a lot of the new technology is compatible with wires that are even 19 years old.
Got
it. Okay. So that's a good segue. So this is just like a picture. This is what I show to my residents when I want to yell at them and quiz them. If this X right here is the target, this is a slice through your brainstem. Every one of those every one of those like little structures you see there has like a critical function in your body. And so having that little X move 2 millimeters in one direction might be the difference between a good effect and a bad effect. The subthalamic nucleus is about 2 millimeters thick. It sits at an angle. The total length of it's around 8 millimeters. These are small things, and you're trying to hit it with a wire from 6 centimeters away. If you're off by a couple of degrees or something, by the time you get to the target, you're going to be off by a lot. Okay, so stereotactic functional neurosurgery is the practice of 1,000 sessions. If you're ever in the operating room, we read the numbers off obsessively. We make sure everything's perfectly set up, and we do all that because, again, you can have it for 20 years. I'm going to skip this stuff. So this got screwed up a little bit. So now what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the work that they have all done with the. Sorry, let me just do one thing.
Can you go swimming with it?
Yeah, you can go swimming with it, actually. That is allowed. You can also go scuba diving with it, but you can't go down more than 10 meters because the pressure change will make the battery explode. I would not recommend that. You can get struck by lightning with it. I did have a patient ask me that. So you can do lots of stuff with it. There's lots of things you can do with DBS. It's the same battery. These companies all also make cardiac defibrillators. It's the same battery that they make for that they apply to the other things. Okay, so these are very commonly implanted in people. Lots of people have them, and they're very safe. Okay.
What about if you go to an airport?
That's totally fine. You can go to the
You can
airport.
go through security?
Yeah.
With that thing?
Yeah, you'll have a device card. You give them the device card, and then they'll also just wand you.
Oh.
Yeah, it's totally fine. So now let's talk about one of the other big advances that we're excited about. When I talk to patients about this device, I tell them you're going to go through some programming. We're going to put these wires in your head, and then your movement disorder neurologist is going to tweak your settings. I liken this to a thermostat. We have to find your set point. What kind of electricity, how much electricity, what is ideal for you? And it takes a little while to zone in on the perfect settings. Okay, it's not immediate. So your movement disorder neurologist, after we've done the surgery, has to sit there and do a bunch of programming.
In one appointment, or?
It usually takes several appointments. Now, some things with Parkinson's are much easier to treat with the stimulation than others. Tremor is much more amenable to the stimulation. Usually after one programming session, your tremor is going to be a lot better. The slowness, the rigidity, that usually takes more time. So then you got to go hang out with one of our movement disorder neurologists, like Dr. Salvadorai, who's here. You guys meet Dr. Chan. I have a bunch of patients with him. You go hang out with Dr. Chan, and he does a programming session. The reps will be there. It takes a little while to find your perfect settings. What we want to do is we want to move towards something called closed loop, where the system itself records something from your body and uses that to go back and actually change the way the stimulation is. So there's a lot of talk right now about closed loop. Medtronic is going to tell you that they're about to get FDA approved for it. They just got approved in Europe. But this is kind of one of the next things. All right. How can we record from the brain and stimulate from the brain at the same time? That's a very difficult engineering problem, but it's something a lot of people, myself included, are working on. So then you have this nice guy. I guess he's chopping up a bell pepper, and he's got double batteries, which is strange. But the batteries are recording something, and then they're changing the way that the stimulation works. Okay, so there's a guy named Phil Starr at UCSF, and Phil's been working on this for a long, long time. Some of the things and ways that they were doing this are not going to be available anymore, but I can tell you a lot of people are actively working at it, and there's still a lot more optimization that needs to happen. So there's a lot of papers that people are publishing. It's really hot right now, but this is the next thing that I think is going to be big. So what is this? How does this fit into the analogy? Well, we're going to go from the old style Honeywell thermostat to like the Google Nest, where again, this thing is going to record from your brain, and then there's a whole bunch of ideas about what signal you need to pull out in order to get it optimized. And then that will allow it to become an actual thermostat. Okay, the battery will do it. Whereas right now, your neurologist is acting like basically the thermostat. Okay, we want the computer to do it instead. And I do think we're getting closer to this. I think that there's evidence obviously that it works, and that's why they're getting FDA approval. But it's still not exactly ready for prime time. All right. And this is one of the things that even if you have old wires in your head, the new batteries will still connect to them and can still do electrical recordings from them, which is how it's doing the closed loop stuff. So now the battery that your wife had that you had implanted initially, that was probably like a Medtronic, not Percept's the new one, it's like adaptive, or it was one of the old ones. Oh, Activa. She probably had an Activa battery put in, and that they don't even make that anymore. In fact, I do have a claim to fame. I put the last Activa battery in the University of Toronto. They told me straight up, we don't have any more of these. It's the last one that was put in someone's body. So I did that because it was a trial and I was working with Dr. Lozano. So now all the batteries are Percept batteries. Percept means perception. So anyways, that's one of the things that Medtronic is the only company that has that. So again, I'm just going to go back to this because I talked a little about the therapeutic window and the directional leads. All this technology is to try and get us to the point where we get the therapeutic window bigger. As you move through time, what's going to happen is that, again, the amount of medication you're needing is going to get more. That's going to improve stimulation or the medication. And again, here, this graph is supposed to show you, as you're going through time, this is the amount of drug you have in your system. When you get too high, you get dyskinesia. When you get too low, you get off. Our goal is to make the on-time therapeutic window bigger. So these are just pictures from papers that I've published in the last couple of years. At UConn, we're doing a lot of research on this. This is stuff for designing stimulation, for doing intraoperative recordings. I do a lot of different experiments, the whole purpose of which is to try and improve the efficacy of deep brain stimulation. Yeah.
Has anybody looked at, I don't even care if it's a study, has anybody started to look at whether exercise affects how fast you need the increase?
The increase in how much medication you might need or something. Yeah, people have shown that like more repetitive exercise, like getting on a bike or walking, does seem to delay the increase. So there's a lot of evidence about that. Yeah.
What is the theory about what DBS is actually doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have no idea how it works. there's like half a dozen theories. My favorite, synaptic filtering. There's jamming theory. There's axonal blockade. There's like a bunch of. Everyone wants to be the person who figures it out. We are not close to figuring it out. If we knew the mechanism really well, the closed loop stuff would be a lot easier. These intraoperative recordings where you like record from the brain and try and stimulate in weird ways. There's only a handful. There are incredibly painful experiments to do. I only do electrophysiology because I've been doing it for about 25 years at this point. So not a lot of people do it. It's expensive because it's OR time, and OR time bills out at like $2,000 or $3,000 every 15 minutes. There's realistically like 3 or 4 labs that are doing intraoperative stuff to try and figure out what the mechanism is. And we are going to be very soon. We're going to have some new equipment. We're going to be one of the few ones at UConn doing it. Having said that, this is a really famous paper that people publish. DBS bang for buck is incredible. You get a ton more on time, and that's the on-label like selling point is your medications will be more effective for longer, and tell people it's going to dial your disease back about 10 years. This is what my OR team looks like here. This is our picture of us from after our first case. It's hard to tell you how much sweat I had in my scrubs doing the first time. Hadn't been done at UConn about 10 or 15 years. We've now done more cases at UConn than they've ever done for deep brain stimulation. We're doing lots of stuff. And like I said, we've got a lot of really exciting things coming our way. So if you want to come see me, I have a website, The STEM Doctor. You guys can make an appointment. Always happy to talk to people about DBS pretty much right away. You go there and book an appointment. My scheduler Magdalena calls people usually within a day or two. And I do telemedicine appointments. It's too much for a pain to get to Farmington. I'll do a telemedicine appointment, and if it's good, we'll go.
How early in the how early in the disease progression do you recommend DBS?
Yeah, this is one of those things where we're still doing a lot of work on it. There's a trial that just came out called Early STEM, where they were implanting people earlier and earlier with the thought that it would give them more benefit for longer. Technically, it didn't show a significant benefit, but there was a trend towards it. I would say once you're starting to get some dyskinesias from the medications or any side effects from the medications, I would start thinking about talking to neurologists about it. Once you're taking about 500 to 1,000 milligrams of levodopa a day, that's a pretty high dose. So once you're taking, 5, 6, 7 tabs a day, you start to be like, hey, I'm starting to get more interested in DBS. That's a good time frame to start thinking about it.
My memory's really been affected, so I had the question in my head. Let me see if I can bring it back. I'm sorry, you'll have to go to somebody else while I try to remember.
It's all good.
I was just curious, what about the wave shape and frequency of pulse?
Yeah, so the pulse, the way that it's designed is it's not a balanced square wave pulse. The way that it's designed, and I know that Phil has that drawn on here, it is a huge pulse and then there's a long, shallow recovery phase after it. I don't think that's the most optimal way to stimulate. The problem is that most people don't have FDA-approved experimental stimulators in the OR. We're about to buy one because I think there's a lot that can be done with pulse shape, or regularity of interstimulus intervals, all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, again, there's realistic 4 or 5 people in the world who do intraoperative recordings, and most of them, that's just not something they're interested in. I'm extremely interested in it. Hopefully, we'll have a trial with it sometime in the next couple of years.
Okay. Can I just, now that I've remembered it, I don't care if there have been any studies. I guess there haven't been big enough ones, but what can you tell me anecdotally or from other people you've talked to about any effect DBS has on non-motor symptoms? And I'm not talking about gut symptoms.
Oh, I have a patient who had a lot of anxiety and stuff and executive function stuff. They are extremely happy with their system. They are extremely happy. I'm actually the first guy I treated. He had a lot of side effects that were anxiety related. If you come down on the meds might be causing those things. Meds have side effects. I mean, my patients are coming down on average 50% plus. But the literature says 50% is a success. My average is really around 75% med reduction. You get off the meds, obviously.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.